Welcome, everybody, to the next edition of TreeLines podcast, where we are continuing our conversation with Blake Sherry and his experiences that he encountered procuring wood for the mills in his area. You talking about cankers, and we had mentioned earlier about the high valued portion of the tree being in the butt log. And there's an idea, I guess, or an opinion out there that if the tree has a canker or a defect, say in the first 4 feet of the tree, and that logger decides to perform what's called a jump butt and basically cut that defect out. You're talking about weight and you're talking about quality and everything. Well, that might be fine for a couple of trees out of a stand, a few trees. But when you start having a large portion of the stand having to be jump butted and those bottom sections being cut off and either left in the woods because they are of no value and the logger doesn't want to fool with hauling them to the mill for them just to be deducted at the payment, so they're leaving them there. So that
The,
can add up. That weight of those defects can accumulate very quickly.
well, it's the biggest, it's the largest diameter section of the tree, and I can't tell you the number of times I've seen landowners. The logger is oftentimes put in a very hard spot because sometimes they're supposed to make chicken salad out of you know what.
Yeah.
So the number of times that there's a huge pile of junk butts out there, and the
Hmm.
loggers doing it because they don't want to get cold or even worse, get a load rejected at the sawmill because it doesn't meet the spec that the sawmill is looking for. And the landowner's mad that they took, in the South, you're getting paid by the ton. So
Right.
the heaviest section of the tree is now being cut off 5, 10, 15, 20%, however many of the trees, and being left out there that they're going to have to clean up. But again, the logger's put in a situation where it's either I send it to the sawmill and I incur my own financial penalty for it, or I cut it out here. I don't hear anything from the sawmill about it, and the landowner suffers. And
Right.
oftentimes it's this push pull, on what's the best thing to do.
Exactly. That's interesting that you brought that up because, like you said, I have seen that happen a lot and have heard some not good situations coming out between the timber buyer, the logger, and the landowner, and it causes some problems. So, if you would continue on, it's what you were, as you were talking about this, the straightness of the trees and the smaller limbs.
The issues with knots a lot of times, if they're untrimmed knots, if they're so big that it's hard for a logger to trim the knot, a lot of times they don't, and it gets caught up in saws, and it will lead to downtime. I would think a bigger, that's more so a logger cleaning up wood issue. I think the bigger issue would be an excessively knotty tree or something with forks to it, because an excessively knotty tree, that's going to be a tree that is going to produce, that section of number 3, number 4 board. And the way lumber's graded, machine stress rated lumber, number 1, number 2, 3, 4, number 2 prime, but 3 and 4s, that's the worst. Right now, as far as I know, I mean, most mills, for whatever they're producing for a 3 or 4 board, they're either breaking even on them or not making money on a 3 or 4 board. Excessive knots will drive a board to be number 3 or number 4. 100% of tax that a landowner pays if someone, if a procurement forester from a sawmill rolls up to their stand and looks at it and they see it's got a ton of knots, it's got canker, it has wood movement all over the place. I mean, they're getting paid less of a price than their neighbor right next door who may have planted a better tree, may have had better silviculture. That's why it was kind of frustrating to me sometimes. You get caught in situations where you price one track and then you price another, then the landowner, you talk to the wood dealer who's trying to buy the track to send the wood to you, and they say, well, the landowner's mad because their neighbor down the street got X, and it's like, well, I priced that, and that landowner got paid more because they had a better track. That is going to suit the mill better. It is of better quality. There's often quality is not the only consideration. There's a lot of considerations that go into it, but it would be nonsensical to say that log quality has no correlation to the price that you get paid at the sawmill. And that's not just saying that, there's things that are saw timber size, but they're not necessarily saw timber quality.
That brings us into a next point I wanted to bring up, and that's about You mentioned earlier how timber is bought and sold in the South on the ton and is paid by tons per acre. And talking about higher quality stems, and can you talk a little bit about your experience, what you saw as far as with advanced genetics and the landowner or the stand having more tons per acre with the advanced genetics and how that impacted the bottom line?
Getting the tons that matter, getting your annual increment of tons added to the stand per year to the right diameter growth. Just planting them really thick. And man, my stand is, I'm doing 10 tons an acre. I'm growing out here right now. That's great, right? Well, if it's all at 726 and it's going to pulpwood because you're not getting the correct diameter growth to your crop trees, then that doesn't do you as well as if you backed off your density a little bit, put that wood or put that extra volume gain into your crop trees that are of good enough quality to make saw timber, make chipped saw. I mean, ultimately, you're going to get to your solid wood producing trees faster by lowering the density and putting your volume gain to your better trees. So a lot has been said by landowners when it comes to wood quality, growing wood too fast, and well, the sawmill won't take it if it may be the right size, but it's of a certain age. And that definitely is a consideration for some sawmills. I mean, some sawmills do have rules out there on rings per inch, and they do have rules out there on we won't take wood less than a certain age. That is not the norm. That's more an exception to the rule. I never asked when I worked at a mill, how old is this wood? We had no ring per inch requirement. The idea that, wood that grew to a certain diameter quicker than something else was going to get you a decrease in price. I mean, at least for most dimensional lumber mills I can think of, that really isn't the case. You will get paid less if your wood's sweepy, has crooked dogleg, a lot of knots, forked all over the place, and has a bunch of canker. That's very easy to see when you roll up to a stand.
In the area that I cover, I only know of 2 mills that have an age requirement, and both of those are going to specialty products. One is going to the plywood for the peeler logs, what they call peeler logs. But in the mills that I mentioned earlier, the new state-of-the-art sawmills that have come into Mississippi, one of them being Idaho Forest Products and another one being Buer, I've asked both those procurement foresters, do you have an age requirement? No. Do you have a ring count requirement? No. That can come into the situation if you're going for something specialty. But like you mentioned earlier, the majority of the lumber, that the demand for lumber now, the majority of it is for 2x4s coming out of these fast run sawmills.
And most often, I would say the premium that you would realize for growing wood for a specialty market is not of a marginal benefit of growing a log for what the prevailing market is. You're not going to get paid so much extra to grow out another 20 years. Once you're past 30, 35, I mean, that's when you're going to start seeing those rings tighten up. If you're growing out now to, say 20 to 30, somewhere in that range, I mean, you're not going to throw the ring per inch that, a lot of these mills are requiring. So, and the other point I'd say to that too is most of those mills have those requirements until it gets really wet.
Right.
And then they're just needing to run the mill. There's a few mills I know that, they only bought natural wood. They made a very big deal of that. When it gets very wet outside, they change their tune, and then all of a sudden they're buying planted wood and buying quite a lot of planted wood to make sure they can keep the mill running. So those are definitely subject to change, but I would not be planting trees today with the idea that I would be servicing a specialty market. Now, and again, you have to be mindful of your markets. You have to have some knowledge about where you're at and what the mills around you care for. But I would argue that most mills nowadays are going by SPIB standards, they're not going to have an age requirement or ring requirement there.
I get that question a lot every year, sometimes multiple times each week, of how many trees should I be planting per acre. And there are still some skeptics out there that say you should be planting over 700 trees per acre. And I know when I was an undergraduate in forestry, I worked on some projects looking at planting density. And for as long as forestry has been a science, there has been planting density studies. All of them have shown that the wider spacing produces more saw logs because the trees have more room to grow. You have less stress on the trees that are there because they have more nutrients and water availability to each individual. And that's a whole different topic that we could go down into on another podcast. But sticking to the procurement side of this, all pine trees grow fast when they're first planted because they're competing with one another to get to the sunlight. Sunlight is where they're, trying to get access to, and so that's why they all grow fast at first. They're trying to capture that crown. But then when they get to be about 10 years old, they're going to start slowing down. That's basically the equivalent of tree puberty when it starts, and they start transitioning from juveniles into adults, and that growth starts slowing down. Those rings start getting tighter, and you start having more mature wood than you do juvenile wood. Taking all of that into consideration, a landowner is really doing themselves a favor for so many ideas, for tree health, for stand health, for wildlife, for tree growth and everything by lowering that planting density and growing a better tree.
Put in the available nutrients to your crop trees. To me, I mean, it's a race to market with your trees, and you want to do everything you can to give the nutrients available to the trees that are going to produce the highest value per ton for you. And that's going to be saw timber, that's going to be chipped saw, that's going to be poles. One piece I think I just need to state clearly here for me as someone who worked at a sawmill buying wood, what mattered to me was, one, doing business with someone that I trusted. So a supplier or a landowner that I had good relationship with, and I knew who I could lean on. When it came to buying wood from them, when I go out to a tract, the things that mattered were, you wanted to see dry ground, and unfortunately, not everyone has dry ground.
Right.
But dry ground is always good to see. Height, not even the biggest consideration, really. I mean, my mill, the minimum log size, we bought cut to length logs at 16 feet, 16 and a half feet, and our minimum tree length log size was 33 feet. So the mega tall trees, I mean, really did not make that much of a difference to me. It had to be of the right butt and top diameter specs. So, saw timber for us was 14.8, chipped saw was 10.6, 14-inch butt, 8-inch top, minimum 33 feet length, chipped saw, same length, 10-inch butt, 6-inch top. But height, not a huge consideration, as long as it was meeting the minimum top height specs. And then you wanted to see trees that were of quality. So not a lot of canker, straight, to generically say it, pretty wood. I mean, you don't want to drive in there and be like, geez, I wonder what happened in here. You start trying to figure out like what went wrong.
What a train wreck.
Yeah. Oh, there's a few stands. I remember I called people back and said, I'm not going to price this. I know it may meet the size requirement, but the price that I would give you would be considered offensive. I mean, I'd rather just not give you a price.
That problem could have been averted at the beginning of the stand had they done just a little bit more of planning of what they were going to replant with.
Yes, no, I definitely agree. You want to have options available, and I mean some of those. So say like a long leaf straw stand that someone would plant. I mean, let's be honest. I mean that wood's going for pulpwood at the end of rotation, and so some people decided that they wanted to do that, and then all of a sudden they wanted to do solid wood products, and it's like, well, you limited your number of options with the silviculture that you chose. Some stands where you could tell that they were just trying to get it done as cheaply. Whoever planted it was trying to get it done as cheaply as possible. For some people, they think about the cost today. They don't think about the value tomorrow, which I think is a little bit counterintuitive for the whole idea of planting trees. If you're someone that plants trees, I would think that's a forward-looking person. But some people do get bogged down in the cost of reforestation and everything like that, which is a completely legitimate concern. You can't spend everything. If you
Right.
could, you'd be fertilizing and, weed control every few years and everything like that. But there's some, just known good practices out there that you wish a lot of people would follow.
Well, it's kind of like Warren Buffett's quote was, price is what you pay, value is what you get. And I've always said you can always put a saw log through a pulp mill, but you cannot put a pulp log through a sawmill. So by producing a better log, you just have more options of what you're able to do with it at the end of the rotation. You're not getting boxed into that one product market.
And that speaks to a good point. So, I mean, what oftentimes happens is pulp mills will blend wood. So they will buy, if they really need wood, they will buy all the pulp wood off a track, all the chip saw, all the saw timber. They'll buy everything. You just cut it to a certain top size and then take it to the pulp mill. And so when I worked at the pulp mill, I used to joke, everything's pulpwood when we decide it's pulpwood. At the same time, we weren't paying pulpwood prices for those other products. We had to pay whatever the product price was for those other products. And we had to do that because they were of the quality to do that. I mean, if you have someone working at a pulp mill that is of at least, decent intelligence, they'll go out to a stand that they're looking to blend. And, if someone is trying to convince them to pay a blend price, but they see that the larger wood that's out there, the larger diameter wood out there is not of chip and saw timber pole quality, then they'll say, I'm not going to pay you extra for something that was going to come to me anyway that a sawmill wouldn't take. I'll pay you extra if you have the option of taking that wood elsewhere. I have to basically pay that same price in order to get it back to me.
That is very, very impactful when it comes down to the selling of the wood, that the landowner, even though it's going to pulpwood, can still get the saw log price for it because it would have gone for saw timber had the mill not needed it so badly.
Yeah, and normally what we do when we have a situation like that is you have to be able to justify your decision. So you need a cruise, you need the product breakdowns. And say pulpwood's $10 per ton, chip and saw is $20 per ton, and saw timber's $30 per ton. Just throwing out numbers there, and it's split 30-30-30 across the stand. So you take your volume per product by your product percentage, you times that, and then you blend the price all together. And other times too, because because a lot of paper mills have been burned by people in the past who weren't being completely forthright on what they were hauling. For example, they get a blend price from someone and the logger would start cutting it and start hauling to the pulp mill, but they were also hauling some of that wood to another location, to hauling the product somewhere else. So basically getting a blend price on a non-blend product. A lot of pulp mills that I've seen move to, all right, we're going to buy the product, but you still have to separate it out normally. I will pay you that saw timber price, but it can't be on the same truck as the pulpwood. Normal product sorts, everything like that. So again, I know Jason likes to talk about a lot of options, but it is important to keep your options open, especially if you have a strong pulp market.
Sounds like you really had a lot of experiences throughout your career as a procurement forester. Just to reiterate what you've said in the past, I mean, I guess you could say the most important thing for a landowner in merchandising their timber would be looking at quality traits of the stems that they have on their property and in the timber that they are willing to sell. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, control the controllables. So you can't necessarily control whether the pulp mill's going to stay open another 50 years. You can't control what sawmill, large Canadian company is going to build a sawmill near you. You can't control all that, but you can control your silviculture and how you manage your wood, and to retain the options by putting the best product out there. I mean, you're going to set yourself up for way more success than someone who's just looking to, throw trees in the ground.
So thank you, Blake, for coming on, being with us today, and thank you for this information that you provided us. It's been great. You've given us and landowners alike a lot to think about. And for our listeners, I want to thank you all for joining us today. If you are not signed up for our TreeLines newsletter, you can visit our website at www.arborgen.com. and go on and sign up to receive our newsletter that is full of information like what we've shared today on this podcast. And if you are interested in speaking with a reforestation advisor, you can also go on there and request contact with one of us, Blake or myself or any of our other reforestation advisors that are on staff. And I want to thank you all and bid you all a great day.